13. Anton Lazaro and Gisela Castro Medina. After connecting on a sugar daddy dating website in May of 2020, 32-year-old Anton Lazaro and 19-year-old college Gisela Castro Medina conspired to traffic female victims for commercial acts of intimacy. Lazaro paid Medina upwards of $50,000 over a 7-month period to recruit targets who matched his taste in appearances. At the time, Lazaro was a well-connected donor and political strategist for the Minnesota Republican Party. He was also known for flaunting his lavish lifestyle on social media, where he posted photos of himself on exotic vacations, private planes, and hobnobbing with high-ranking politicians. Lazaro allegedly used his money and powerful position to coerce his victims into silence, including by having them sign non-disclosure agreements. But he still caught the attention of authorities, and his days of living the high life are over for now. In 2021, the FBI raided his apartment. To prevent Medina from talking, Lazaro continued giving her thousands of dollars and paying her rent and college tuition. He was nevertheless arrested on multiple federal human trafficking-related counts. During his trial, Lazaro admitted to having relations with the victims but denied recruiting them. He claimed that the case against him was politically motivated, but the jury apparently disagreed and found him guilty on 7 counts. Lazaro faces a 10-year mandatory minimum, but prosecutors are calling for a 30-year sentence, followed by 10 years of post-release supervision. He'll be sentenced in August of 2023. Medina pleaded guilty to her role in the operation and is also awaiting sentencing. 12. Jeffrey Pine. 51-year-old Ruth Pine was bludgeoned and stabbed to death inside the garage of her Highland Township, Michigan home on May 27, 2011. And the person responsible for her demise was none other than 21-year-old Jeffrey Pine, her own son. Jeffrey was a former star athlete and high school valedictorian who was pursuing a biology degree at the University of Michigan. His arrest for first-degree murder came as a shock to the community, who held the young man in high regard. And many people initially refused to believe that Jeffrey was capable of killing his own mother. According to prosecutors, the young man was propelled by pent-up rage over Ruth's mental health issues. Over the years, he'd suffered at the hands of his mother's abuse, and in 2010, the year before Ruth's murder, she even spent time in jail for assaulting Jeffrey. She managed to avoid charges, though, by accepting treatment and promising to stay on her medication following her release. During the trial, Jeffrey's ex-girlfriend testified that Ruth Pine was dangerous when she was off her meds and that she often assaulted her son. Ruth's sister, on the other hand, argued that the victim wasn't the monster the court made her out to be. Regardless of Ruth's mental state, Jeffrey's defense attorneys denied any responsibility whatsoever on their client's behalf, arguing that Ruth was killed by strangers and that her son had nothing to do with it. There was no physical evidence linking Jeffrey to the murder, and the case was largely circumstantial. But despite this, the jury voted to convict Jeffrey Pine of the lesser charge of second-degree murder. It came as a shock to those who supported the young man's innocence, including his father Bernie, who'd stood by his son throughout the entirety of the case. And after unsuccessfully appealing his conviction, Jeffrey is now serving a 20 to 60-year sentence with an earliest possible release date of 2031. 11. William Shrubsole. Almost every teenager on the planet grows annoyed with their parents at some point for being overly protective. But one young man from Niagara Falls, New York, named William Chandler Shrubsole, took his frustrations to the extreme in 1988 when he beat his mother to death on the morning of his high school graduation. Shrubsole had always been an excellent student, so it was no surprise when he was named valedictorian of his senior class at LaSalle High School. He planned to major in pre-law at the University of Chicago later that year, but his inability to control his temper would soon change the entire course of his future. During the pre-dawn hours of what was supposed to be his graduation day, Shrubsole got into a heated disagreement with his 56-year-old mother Marin after returning home from his girlfriend's house. William's girlfriend lived just 2 blocks away, but Marin was upset about how late her son had stayed out. She called the girlfriend's home and demanded that William return. And when the teen arrived home, he was greeted by his mother, who was waiting for him in the driveway. But instead of going to bed and dealing with the disagreement after resting and cooling off, William and Marianne argued. And when Marianne threatened to call his girlfriend's parents and picked up the phone, William tried to stop her. The fight became physically violent, and at some point the young man could no longer contain his rage. Just 12 hours before he was scheduled to give his valedictorian speech, William bludgeoned Marianne to death with a baseball bat. He never made it to his graduation ceremony because he was already in custody on suspicion of murder. The ceremony continued as planned, but Schram wasn't there to give his valedictorian speech. There was also no mention of what had happened or why he was absent. Of course, people knew about the unspeakable tragedy, but they didn't want to think about it. Meanwhile, William told detectives that his mother had hit him first during their final argument. His defense attorney, Paul Cleary, said that while William and Marianne's surface looked good on the surface, it was a different story behind closed doors. Paul Cleary even claimed that Marianne had a history of beating her son and that she constantly pressured William to do better and more, even after he became the top-ranking student at his school. Friends and classmates were in disbelief over the horrific crime. In addition to being highly intelligent, William was handsome and well-liked, and overnight he went from having a promising future to facing prison time. Speaking with the Associated Press, several of William's acquaintances described him as extremely nice and mild-mannered. Nobody had ever seen him get angry, and it was impossible for anyone to imagine him losing his temper, let alone killing his own mother. But Schram was perfectly capable of murder, according to a court-appointed psychiatrist who diagnosed him as a psychopath and a compulsive liar with no hope for a cure. Schram was initially charged with second-degree murder, but he ultimately pleaded guilty to manslaughter as part of a plea deal. He convinced the court to grant him youthful offender status and only ended up serving 16 months behind bars. Over a 3-year period starting in 1995, he brutally assaulted multiple women. And while on trial for one of these crimes in 1996, Schram faked his own death and fled to Canada, where he continued committing horrifyingly violent crimes. American investigators suspected that he was alive and had gone on the run, but they couldn't find him. He lived under various aliases in Halifax, Nova Scotia, until authorities discovered his real identity and that he was the man responsible for terrorizing an unknown number of local women. Then, in 2000, a Canadian court sentenced Schram to life in prison for his crimes. He was paroled in 2018 on the condition that he would return to the United States. And he's currently serving a 9 to 15-year sentence in New York State for crimes he committed before he fled to Canada. The state parole board denied his bid for freedom in 2022, and the next parole hearing is scheduled for 2024. With any luck, he'll spend the rest of his life behind bars. 10. Mandel Mayhill. In what the media described as a honey trap murder, a 19-year-old straight-A medical student named Mandel Mayhill lured 21-year-old Gagandip Singh to her apartment in Brighton, England in early 2011. Singh was brutally beaten by 2 men and was then set on fire in the trunk of Mayhill's car. Her remains were found in the burned-out Mercedes-Benz 60 miles from the murder scene in southeast London. Authorities charged Mayhill and her 2 accomplices, Harinder Singh Shoka and Darren Peters, in connection with the crime. Mayhill and Gagandip were once close friends. But that changed when Gagandip allegedly tried to assault Mayhill while spending the night at her apartment during the summer of 2010. Prosecutors accused Mayhill of having Gagandip killed as revenge for the incident. For a long time, Mayhill admitted to luring the victim over to her home under false pretenses, and that she initially failed to tell the police the full truth. She even acknowledged that Gagandip would most likely still be alive if she hadn't gone over to her apartment that night. But she insisted that she didn't know about any plan to kill or even hurt the woman. The jury acquitted Mayhill of murder, but convicted her of great bodily harm. So, instead of focusing on her next academic achievement and the aid work she hoped to do as part of her medical training, she was headed to prison. Mayhill was sentenced to 6 years and was released in 2016 after serving 4 years. Harindesign Shoka was convicted of murder and sentenced to life with a minimum of 22 years, while Darren Peters received a 12-year prison sentence for manslaughter. Following her release, Mayhill married up-and-coming politician Verity, who became the mayor-elect for London's Redbridge Borough in 2019. Signbowler's victory was controversial due to his wife's criminal background and the particularly heinous nature of Gagandev Sign's murder. At first, he publicly defended Mayhill, arguing that she was a great example of a success story coming out of Britain's criminal justice system. Signbowler said that he and Mayhill had consciously chosen to keep their side of the story to themselves, and he praised his wife's charity work and other accomplishments from both before and after her legal troubles. Gagandev Sign's family accused Mayhill of trying to sneak out from underneath her actions and weasel her way into polite society after receiving what they considered to be a slap on the wrist from the court. And although Signbowler initially seemed determined to serve as mayor, despite any public backlash he received, he ultimately withdrew from the position before he was even slated to take over the role from the previous leader. In a statement, he said he didn't want to bring undue harm to the distinguished position by allowing it to be steeped in controversy. He emphasized his continued support for his wife and his desire to shield his family from public speculation and hearsay. 9. Jack Snyder. While driving home from his girlfriend's birthday party in the middle of the night in February 2023, a high school senior named Jack Snyder saw 2 teens walking along the streets of Battle Creek, Michigan in the freezing cold. Knowing that the wind, snow, rain, and frigid temperatures could legitimately endanger their lives, he pulled over and offered them a ride. It wasn't unlike Snyder to help someone in need. He was an honors student at a local high school who was known for his intelligence, kindness, and his moral compass, which pushed him in the direction of doing what he believed was the right thing. Unfortunately, he was unaware that the passengers he picked up had plans to repay his generosity with a horrifying act of violence. At some point during the ride, the suspects attempted to carjack Snyder, and they fired 2 bullets into him before fleeing the scene as officers responded to reports of gunshots. Police arrived to find Snyder lying motionless on the ground next to his vehicle, and unfortunately, he was pronounced dead at the scene. Authorities caught up with the 2 suspects after receiving an influx of tips from community members, along with surveillance footage that enabled them to track the perpetrator's movements after the shooting. One suspect faces charges of felony murder, carjacking, and 2 gun counts. According to police, he admitted to stealing his mother's 9mm handgun and firing the fatal shots. He told detectives that the other suspect was chatting on social media with someone he'd stolen cars for in the past. The suspect allegedly said he decided to pull the trigger when it appeared as though Snyder was reaching for a gun or something to defend himself with. The other suspect was hit with 1 count each of open murder and carjacking, but at the moment, both cases are ongoing. 8. Marin Catherine Vesley. In June 2014, police in West Linn, Oregon, published photos of a large amount of drugs and cash that were seized during a recent traffic stop. The contraband consisted of 1.5 pounds of psilocybin mushrooms, commonly known as magic mushrooms, as well as 67 methamphetamine and ecstasy pills. Additionally, $1,600 in alleged drug trafficking proceeds was recovered from the vehicle. Behind the wheel was a young woman named Marin Catherine Vesley. Some of the drugs that were seized during the traffic stop were found in the 18-year-old's purse. Vesley and a man who was in the car with her, Gordon Filimukady, were arrested in connection with the drugs. Up until that point, Vesley was a model citizen and a straight-A student, according to her mother, who told Oregon Live that her daughter had graduated early. In high school, she took advanced music classes and calculus, and she had a large amount of volunteer community service under her belt. During one of Vesley's court hearings, her mother told the judge that the young woman had gotten into drug treatment, attended school in New York, and had landed herself a job since her arrest. Vesley took a deal and pleaded guilty to 1 felony count of attempted delivery of meth in exchange for getting several other felony charges dropped. And in the end, she was sentenced to 3 years of probation. The judge appointed to her case even commended her for doing all the right things to get her life back on track. According to Vesley's mother, Marin met George Cady after leaving her family home and moving to the Portland area on her own. But trouble soon followed. Cady, who was considerably older than Vesley, opted to go to trial. Unfortunately though, the outcome of his case is unclear. 7. Joel Ortiz. After graduating as the valedictorian of his high school in 2016, Joel Ortiz went on to study information technology at the University of Massachusetts. Known for his impressive tech skills, he was already a seasoned programmer by the time he entered college. During high school, Ortiz was extremely interested in robotics, and he enjoyed passing on his knowledge to other students. His ambitions took a less respectable turn at university though, when he began stealing cryptocurrency. Using a method called SIM swapping, he stole his victims' identities and convinced their cell phone providers to assign their numbers to him. From there, he took over their social media and financial accounts. In some cases, he even managed to obtain identity documents in his victims' names. Ortiz also sometimes impersonated his victims for the sake of trying to get people to send him money. Investigators reportedly identified at least 40 victims, and it's possible that there were even more that they didn't know about. Around half of them lived in California, and Ortiz allegedly targeted wealthy tech entrepreneurs and cryptocurrency executives. After discovering in 2018 that he was planning to travel out of the country, authorities made their move and arrested him. According to an affidavit, Ortiz admitted to spending around $150,000 in Las Vegas in the weeks leading up to his arrest. Police seized $250,000 in stolen cryptocurrency, although the actual amount he stole was somewhere between $5 and $7.5 million. Ortiz was originally charged with 41 crimes, and in early 2019, he pleaded no contest to 8 counts of identity theft and several computer crimes. As a result, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison. In a historic first that would set the precedent for future cases, Ortiz was the first defendant to ever be convicted of a SIM swapping scheme at a time when the practice was growing in popularity. A handful of other alleged SIM swappers were facing charges for large-scale identity and cryptocurrency theft at the time of his conviction. But authorities hope the outcome of Ortiz's case will influence future rulings. 6. Hayley Dakeman. As a straight-A student, 18-year-old Hayley Dakeman had a lot of options for her future. And as her high school graduation approached in 2021, she made plans to attend the University of New Orleans in the fall. But her life took a tragic turn just days before she was sent to walk across the stage, when she and a friend were found unresponsive and rushed to the hospital. They'd each taken half of what they believed was a Percocet pill, but it was actually fentanyl, and while the friend survived, Hayley died from the effects of the overdose after spending 4 days in the hospital fighting for her life. Hayley didn't have a major history of risky or rebellious behavior. In fact, she was well liked among her peers and teachers, and she typically stayed out of trouble. The teen's untimely death served as a sobering reminder that just one bad decision can cost someone their life. In the days following Hayley's death, Jefferson Parish Coroner Gary Sitanovich said that he hoped the tragedy would be a wake-up call to young people about the dangers of counterfeit pills. Speaking with Fox 8 Live, he said that while a pill may look like a Percocet or some other pharmaceutical, it may actually be fentanyl. In addition to being a dangerous narcotic in the first place, more often than not, fentanyl products are manufactured illegally. They're not made under strict laws or standards like legitimate prescription pills, and contain inconsistent doses of the drug. Even coming from the same batch, one fentanyl pill might kill someone, while another has a much milder effect. In other words, taking these drugs is essentially like playing Russian roulette with one's life. At a time when America's opioid epidemic was plaguing rural communities, Black Mines Parish Sheriff Gerald A. Turlidge Jr. vowed to go after criminals who were bringing deadly drugs into the community. Authorities eventually charged the man who sold Hayley and her friend the fentanyl pill, 22-year-old Franklin Senfles, with second-degree murder. and in the end, he pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of manslaughter and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. 1. Lorenzo Elliott. In the state of Louisiana, prosecutors have considerable power when it comes to the decision of whether or not to charge teens as adults for certain felonies. So, when Lorenzo Elliott was accused of being the getaway driver for 2 of his cousins following a robbery in New Orleans in December 2015, it didn't matter that he was a straight-A student and a member of the school band with a near-perfect attendance rate. In a Christian Science Monitor report on Elliott's run-in with the law, journalist Katie Reckdahl wrote that the ordeal started when the young man failed to show up for school one morning, prompting a social worker to call his house. And that's when Elliott's family told the worker that police had arrested him for his alleged role as the getaway driver for his cousins. He was charged as an adult, which threatened to severely damage his future and to send him to prison rather than college. For Lisa Maria Rhodes, the social worker who called Elliott's house searching for him that morning, it wasn't unusual to learn that an absentee student had been arrested. In fact, she'd dealt with it many times. And more often than not, a student's family couldn't afford bail, landing them behind bars for months or years to come as they faced their case in court. But after seeing a number of kids with promising futures get lost to the system and never return to the classroom, Rhodes and other staff members weren't about to let it happen again. They threw their support behind Elliott full force and advocated fiercely for him in court. The morning after Elliott's arrest, Rhodes hand-delivered a letter about his accomplishments and character to the judge overseeing the case. At the time, the young man's school didn't have any resources for supporting kids who became entangled in the legal system, especially those who landed in adult court. But Rhodes vowed to devote whatever time and energy she could to helping students in these positions, starting with Elliott's case. Lorenzo Elliott would later tell the Christian Science Monitor that he grew up in public housing and found himself running with a bad crowd. He said that his own family told him he was either supposed to end up dead or in jail. And while Rhodes' letter failed to sway the judge, who imposed a high bail that Elliott's family couldn't afford, her advocacy gave Elliott hope that he could still have a bright future one day. Rhodes continued to fight for Elliott's release as the prosecutor weighed whether or not to pursue the case. To her, it didn't matter whether or not he was guilty. She knew that teenagers with developing minds are prone to making mistakes, and it doesn't mean they'll continue along that path as adults. Elliott might have made a terrible decision, but his academic accomplishments showed that he wanted a better life than the one he grew up with. The prosecutor decided to pursue the charges, which could have landed the young man behind bars for 15 years. But after finally reading Rhodes' letter, the judge reduced Elliott's bail, and the community came together and raised the necessary funds to secure his freedom. He immediately went back to playing in the school band and scrambled to catch up with the nearly 2 months' worth of lessons that he'd missed. The case dragged on until 2 years after Elliott's graduation, at which point he took a plea deal that spared him from prison time and came with 3 years of probation. His dedication to school played a major role in the judge's decision to be lenient. But Elliott gave a lot of the credit for his freedom to Rhodes, who tirelessly advocated for him to receive a second chance. And since then, Rhodes has worked with other students in need, including newly arrived immigrants who've become straight-A students while fighting to legalize their residency in the US. 4. Grace Smith. The mask mandates that came along with the COVID-19 pandemic caused a lot of mixed feelings in the United States, and the issue became so divisive that in some cases, police got involved. Many people felt strongly that wearing a mask helped to reduce the virus's spread, and that people had a civic duty, not to mention a legal obligation to comply with mask mandates. Others, however, believed that mask mandates violated constitutional freedoms, and that they weren't effective at stopping the spread of the coronavirus in any way. These clashing views made their way into American high schools, where some students got in trouble and even made news headlines for refusing to wear a mask. Included among them was Grace Smith, a straight-A junior from Laramie, Wyoming, who stubbornly stood by her anti-mask beliefs to the point where she got arrested in the fall of 2021. Smith had no prior run-ins with the law when she refused to wear a mask, and her refusal to leave school grounds after being told to put on a mask or leave earned her multiple suspensions. She also racked up $1,000 in trespassing fines for refusing to obey the rules of the mandate. The young woman reportedly cooperated when she was first suspended, but she failed to comply with the next two. She told the Laramie Boomerang that she left as instructed after her first encounter with administrators. But after consulting a lawyer with her family, Grace took a more strong-willed stance. During the second incident, she refused to leave and accepted the $500 fine that came along with the decision. She reacted the same way the third time she was ordered to leave. But instead of quietly ticketing and fining her, the police came to the school and arrested her. As the school sat on lockdown for an hour and a half, Grace engaged in a showdown with school officials and was eventually handcuffed and hauled off to the police station. Her father, Andy, recorded the perp walk as he trailed behind the officers who were taking his daughter into custody. Other cell phone footage shows police trying to reason with Grace, but getting nowhere during the showdown that took place before her arrest. During her interview with the Laramie Boomerang, the teen emphasized the importance of protecting rights that she believed were God-given. She said that she believed people should be able to choose whether or not to wear a mask. Altogether, Grace spent 10 days suspended and faced the possibility of being expelled over her refusal to comply with the mask policy. Shortly after news broke of her arrest, Grace officially withdrew from her high school. And during a school board meeting, she accused authorities of unlawfully arresting her. She also chastised school officials for allegedly trying to own kids and make their health decisions for them. While it's unclear what Grace did next in terms of her education, she and 11 other plaintiffs who shared her anti-mask mandate views came together and filed a federal lawsuit against 5 school districts and the Wyoming Department of Health. The lawsuit accused state officials of committing fraud by extending Wyoming's COVID-19 public health emergency longer than necessary in order to obtain federal funding. And in addition to requesting a jury trial, the plaintiffs sought an injunction on mask, social distancing, COVID-19 testing, and quarantining requirements. However, the case fell apart as the plaintiffs repeatedly failed to respond to multiple motions filed on behalf of the defendants to dismiss the suit. In the meantime, 3 of the 11 original plaintiffs left the lawsuit, including Grace and her father. The judge ultimately dismissed the suit without prejudice, which means that the plaintiffs can file another lawsuit over the same complaints if they choose to do so in the future. 3. Mountain View High School stabbing. Located north of Provo, the city of Orem, Utah has a population that's 88% Mormon. And while it doesn't rank among America's safest communities, violence is rare in Orem, and the crime rate is below average. So it was surprising, to say the least, when a student at Mountain View High School stabbed 5 of his classmates one morning in November of 2016. The young man was previously homeschooled and had started attending Mountain View 3 months before the incident. He was a straight-A student with no behavioral issues, and there were no indications that he was being bullied when the disturbing incident happened in a school locker room one morning before gym class. Using a knife with a 3-inch blade, the teen stabbed each victim at least once, striking them in their necks and torsos before turning the weapon on himself. Staff members risked their lives to protect the school students by cornering the stabber until responding officers arrived. Police tasered the young man and took him into custody. Witnesses described a terrifying scene as students fled from the locker room covered in blood. Sophomore Paxton Ransom later told the press that he noticed blood on the locker room floor and thought it was fake until he saw one of the victims laying on the floor. The school went on lockdown for about an hour before police concluded that it was safe to resume the day. 2 victims were rushed to the hospital in critical condition, while 2 others were listed in fair condition. The 4 teens were hospitalized, while the 5th victim was treated and released. Thankfully, all 5 of the students survived their injuries. But hundreds of concerned parents showed up at the school in search of their children. Some kids returned to class, while others went home for the day, unable to focus on anything after what had happened. Even now, in June of 2023, the circumstances surrounding the stabber's decision to commit the crime aren't entirely clear. According to police, the young man said he wanted to know what it felt like to kill before he inflicted similar harm on himself. Shortly after the incident, his parents wrote a heartfelt apology letter that the police released to the public. In the handwritten note, they offered their condolences to the victims and their families, and they acknowledged outright that the victims hadn't done anything to provoke their son. The parents emphasized that the act wasn't racially or ethnically motivated and said they were at a loss to explain how deeply sorry they were for what happened. After being deemed mentally competent to stand trial, the suspect pleaded guilty to 5 counts of attempted aggravated murder. The judge deferred to the maximum sentencing guidelines to keep him locked up for as long as possible, which in his case would be at least until the age of 21. Afterward, he'll have to serve a certain amount of community service as part of his requirement to repay the victims for his actions. 2. Student suspended over inappropriate shirt. A straight A student named Summer was finishing out her senior year at Hickory Ridge High School in North Carolina in 2017 when she unexpectedly got suspended over a dress code violation. The offensive piece of clothing was a long-sleeved, loose-fitting olive green shirt that didn't show her midsection or anything else that would typically be considered inappropriate. But it was an off-the-shoulder top which showed Summer's collarbone and the tops of her shoulders. And while it didn't seem like a big deal, it was apparently against the rules. The shirt also exposed her lower back when she sat down, which also violated school policy. The school's principal approached the teen during lunch and asked her to put a jacket to cover up her shoulders. Summer didn't see the problem with what she was wearing, so she said to the principal twice, "My shirt is fine." She finally relented when a friend gave her a jacket to wear, but that wasn't the end of the ordeal. Speaking with local station WCNC, Summer said that after she put the jacket on over the shirt and zipped it up, the principal told her she had to go to another room to change. She didn't understand why the situation was continuing after she did what was asked of her to remedy the problem. Summer had a 4.4 GPA and was looking forward to choosing from the list of universities that would most likely be available to her, considering her top-notch grades. But this wasn't her first run-in with the school's principal over the years. In fact, so many incidents happened that Summer's mother contacted the school and told them that they had to reach out to her before taking disciplinary action against her daughter. The principal hadn't contacted the young woman's mother on the day of the shirt incident, so when she was asked to go to a separate room to change, she adamantly refused. Summer later told WCNC that she said to the principal, "I'm sorry, but I can't go anywhere with you unless my mum is on the phone." When officials were unable to reach the young woman's mother, she continued with her day as usual. But while sitting in the auditorium with her friends and other students, the principal entered and sent everyone away except for Summer. Afterwards, she accused the principal of threatening to have her arrested by the school resource officer. According to Summer's version of events, the resource officer stood just feet away with his hand on his gun while the principal issued an ultimatum: go change her shirt or be arrested. While many people would likely relent at this point and follow the principal's orders, Summer felt strongly that she was being unfairly targeted for discipline. She continued trying to reach her mum, who called back right in the nick of time and advised her daughter to follow the principal's orders. After finally going to the control room and changing, she was suspended for 10 days for insubordination. More specifically, the complaint noted that Summer denied that her shirt was a problem and that she didn't do as she was told. In addition to the suspension, she was prohibited from attending her graduation and other end-of-the-year senior activities. And while the nature of Summer's history of problems with school officials was never fully disclosed, she found it wildly unfair that she worked so hard for 4 years to walk across the stage only to be banned from doing so. She claimed that the school was allowing drug dealers and other criminals to participate in the ceremony, yet she was excluded for wearing a supposedly offensive shirt, despite being an honor roll student. Summer's mother appealed the school's decision while the teen became increasingly worried that the suspension would affect her choice of colleges. She told WCNC that she was on track to study pre-med and that having a full ride at university was key to her future. But unfortunately, it's unclear whether Summer ended up walking across the stage at graduation and if the suspension hindered her college options. 1. Darnell Hamilton. Before he became an accused criminal, high school senior Darnell Hamilton was an honor student at a Chicago prep school with a 4.0 GPA. He also had hopes of landing a scholarship at Ohio State University after graduation. But his plans for the future were interrupted in September 2013 when he was arrested for allegedly bringing a gun to school. Prosecutors initially claimed that the gun was filled with live rounds, but the school later released a statement saying that the weapon wasn't loaded. Hamilton reportedly told police that he got the gun from a friend and that he had it for protection against gangs who'd been harassing and threatening him for 2 years. And his mother, LaDonna Petty, told a similar story to the press. Speaking with Ballot Club Chicago, she said that her son typically encountered problems during his ride to school on public transportation. And while Hamilton's school was well known for the high college acceptance rate among its students, they were still forced to deal with the reality of what goes on the streets. According to Petty, gangs hassle young people, which puts pressure on them to act like they're not scared in order to avoid being targeted in the future. The concerned mother had gone out of her way to protect Darnell from violence and crime, and at one point, they even packed up and moved to the smaller city of Des Plaines, where the crime rate is lower. But the loss of her job had forced them back to Chicago, where the problems unfortunately continued. When her son was arrested, he quickly admitted that he'd made a mistake. But she understood why, and she continued to support him through his legal troubles. School spokesperson Evan Lewis acknowledged that the area surrounding the school had its challenges, but said that the school itself was well secured. He also said that Hamilton had no previous disciplinary issues. And while there's no excuse for breaking the law, Hamilton's story is a sad one, which tells the tale of a young man who didn't know what else to do in a situation where he felt like he needed to protect himself. The outcome of the case is unclear, but hopefully he managed to square away his legal troubles and continue on to college. Would you rather have a history of being a straight-A student while also having a criminal conviction on your record, or have an unblemished criminal record and a history of being a mediocre student? Let us know in the comments below, and if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye!